Okay, hello everyone. This is Neil. We're going to get started right now. I've got the WebEx pulled up. You should be able to see it. I also, for those of you who are on the line, I'm recording the presentation as well as the call information, so that other folks who aren't able to join us will be able to benefit from the information that we discuss here today. So I do want to encourage you guys, if you have questions as we go through this section, just call them out. I mean, this is designed to be an informal process. I'm not just presenting information to you guys here, but I'm really, going to be walking you through the presentation in hopes that you guys will feel comfortable in taking this information and then training other individuals within your regions and your local communities on the subject matter. So this section that we're going to talk about today is focusing on the incident action plan. So basically, I'm not going to teach you on the whole class again. You guys, most of you, I think, should have already taken the class. But what I will do is sort of walk through some of the slides and give you some pointers on what are some things to mention, to bring up, and to highlight. If you all should have also received yesterday afternoon or evening the facilitator guide for this section. It's still in draft format, so if you guys have any questions or want anything added in there, any feedback, please share it. Write the comments in the facilitator's guide and then send those back to me so I can get those incorporated into the document. But that's a document that you can start on, to take notes in it, however you want to do it. But again, this is a session that is designed to make you feel comfortable. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them at any time during the presentation. So before I get started, does anyone have any initial thoughts they'd like to add, or any questions or anything before we get started and jump right into it? Okay, so we're going to jump right into the incident action planning component of the session. Now, this section really takes about, when you include the exercises and everything else, it really takes about 5 to 6 hours to really complete. Typically, the DRO in-service class is a 2-day class, and so the first component of the class, you're really talking about the concept of operations, the new structure, the ICS structure, that sort of thing. Then you'll typically break for lunch or something like that, and then you'll come back and start the afternoon with the incident action plan process. You'll do that for the rest of the day, and then you'll have a 2-hour exercise on the next morning. So anywhere between 5 to 6 hours is what I find is typical for this presentation. Now, the number one thing that I really want you guys to do and encourage as you're teaching this is that none of us, even if you are an ICS expert or an incident action plan expert, none of us is an expert in how the Red Cross uses the incident action plan and the ICS process, because we're all learning this. And so that's an important aspect that I really want to encourage you guys to take to your sessions, is to ensure that everyone feels comfortable with understanding that we are all learning this together. This is a new process. This is a new system. There's going to be questions. There are going to be some unanswered questions, and that's okay. That we're still working this. We're still developing this together, and that's sort of an important sort of way to set the stage with the IAP section, because there's a lot of information. There's a lot of materials to go over. And it can, quickly get really dry very quickly if you don't sort of set that expectation that, this course is designed to introduce people to the concept of the incident action planning process and not designed to make people into experts. And so this is going to be a continuous cultural change that we're embarking on to, bring the American Red Cross in line with the ICS principles. So, and so that's a good way to frame the conversation going into it. Another thing that I would recommend, moving on to some additional slides here, is we've got some good reference materials, and I would highly encourage you guys, before you start teaching the course, really download or print off the incident action planning guide. I find that guide, before when I was prepping for this course, to really be a very valuable resource to help answer some questions and give me some foundational knowledge on how to present this information to the individuals within the class. So I would really strongly encourage you guys to download that, read it, take a look, and use that as a resource. And then the next few slides go down here to talk about the section purpose, of the direction that we're going as an organization. And again, this is another reason to highlight why it's important that we're not trying to make everybody experts in the incident action planning process, but the intention of the course and the design of this session is to really ensure that people have a general understanding of the direction that we as an organization are going. And then moving down to the section objectives, again, just sort of reviewing the slide process here, really very basic stuff in the beginning. Then we're moving into the planning process. The first is sort of an overview where you get to, give people a brief overview of the planning process before we really dive in to the process itself through each individual section. And again, there are more details on on what specific things to cover within the facilitator's guide. So that is there for your benefit. If you see something that is not answered, that you think is not clear, please write those in the comments and send that back to me so I can get that adjusted. Again, I really want the facilitator's guide to be a turnkey operation for you guys. So read it and make comments. So the next sort of slide goes into the 5 phases of the incident action planning process. This is a good opportunity to sort of walk them through it and really explain the basics of the process. This is also a time where you'll be providing your first handout. And your first handout is just basically a picture on one regular sheet of paper of the planning P, and that's a reference piece of reference materials that they'll use throughout the rest of the session. So hand that out now. There'll be a lot of materials when it comes to exercises and things like that. So you really want to stagger how you hand out the materials and not just give everybody everything all at once, because you'll obviously be giving them exercise materials and things like that, which aren't an appropriate thing to give at the very beginning of the course. So hand out the planning P. And make sure everyone has a copy of it. I also encourage you to hand it out in color as opposed to black and white, just because it'll help distinguish between the different phases of the planning P. Then we discussed a little bit about the purpose of the incident action plan, and this is where it's important to know and to highlight again that we're using the purpose of this is to actually use the planning process. The purpose of this is not to produce an incident action plan. I mean, that is a secondary result of following the process. But the process is designed to allow us to be better planners and better engaged on the entirety of an operation with all of our workforce working together for one common goal. So that's the key thing to mention here, is that we're not just doing extra paperwork. That's not the intention here. The intention is the process and allowing the process to work for all of us. The next focus is on the operational period. And on the operational period, discussing how it focuses on response, and then when we move into sort of longer term recovery, we can move on to 1 week or more for the operational period. And this is a good time to, again, refer back to that planning P, to tell people, and inform people that what an operational period means is that you're completing one cycle of the planning process every operational period. So if the operational period is a day, 24 hours, then you're going to complete one revolution of the process every day. If it's a week, it's the same thing, one revolution of the process every week. And then we move into the initial response. And then you start talking about phase 1, which is you move into understanding the situation, how we respond, how we work, those sorts of things. And again, things to highlight at this point is some of the main things to highlight is that at this point we are less focused on structure and process than we are on meeting the needs of the client. So, this is a great opportunity to really, instill the message that as long as people are not doing anything illegal, immoral, unethical, that you have to be empowered to make those kinds of appropriate decisions within appropriate programmatic guidelines. An example of a programmatic guideline of making an example within the decision is obviously during large-scale disasters, our primary focus is going to be on mass care, and it's not going to be on opening cases and providing financial assistance to the general population. And so that's an important thing to say, is that you're supported, do what you need to do, but do it within mass care and those types of activities, and don't start opening up cases and providing financial assistance after a large tornado has come through a town, instead of opening shelters and providing feeding. So, but again, how you provide the feeding, where you open the shelters, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, immoral, unethical, and you're using good judgment, then you will be supported by the organization. And the concept behind that is that we need to not let bureaucracy bog us down so that we delay our response. So this is designed to put structure and process second and third so that we can get the services where they're needed as quickly as possible. So that's another important thing to mention is that our structural process, our incident action planning process, does not begin until we begin to exit phase one. So at the beginning of the situation, you're really doing what it takes within reason and within reason to get the job done and to provide services during that phase one. So here we're talking again about moving on to sort of initial response and assessment. How you do that, what sort of things are, and this is a great way to engage your class this time. So don't spend the entire session just talking at them. Really engage them in this conversation process about what are some common things that they need to do during that initial response and assessment, and really help engage them in the process. Moving down again, more things onto the initial response and assessment, and then move into the essential elements of information. Again, some basic things here, and there's some more guide and more ways to engage the conversation in the facilitator's guide. So then we move down onto the initial response, again talking about the 5 key activities. And again, this is also, we've got a lot of new folks within the state, so this is another time and opportunity to, again, express that people are going to have to make decisions in an absence of information, of real hard data. Now we need to be going and gathering that information through our situational awareness, but you're going to have to make decisions without that information. But again, focus on those 5 key activities. And then moving to the initial incident briefing. And the initial incident briefing can be, as mentioned in the course, it can be, an email, it can be a phone conference call, but basically this is where you're sharing information about what's happened during the operation. Now, it should not be the first time you're sharing information. That goes down to notification, where you're notified and you're notifying other people of the incident. But this is where you're providing more broad information about more detailed specifics to the response. And then you're establishing initial tasks, and basically just review the slide here. And then, your initial meeting. And so the final component of phase one is this initial IMAT meeting. And the initial IMAT meeting is since we do not have IMATs, Incident Managed Assistance Teams, within the Red Cross, this is really your initial DRO meeting. So this is, at this component, you're having that initial meeting where you're transitioning to an official disaster relief operation. So the important note here on this section is that you stay in phase one until your disaster relief operation becomes operational. So until they assume oversight and control, then you will stay in phase one. And now, if your DRO leadership team is made up of members from your local area, you're going to stay in phase one a lot less time than you would if you were having to deploy in a DRO leadership team within your area. So again, until the DRO leadership team takes over, we stay in phase one, which means that we cannot complete an evolution of the planning cycle. We do not produce an IAP until the DRO team stands up. So before we move on into incident priorities and objectives, does anyone have any questions at this point about any comments or anything like that from a educational or teaching perspective? Okay. So the establishment of the incident objectives, this is phase two. And again, this is a great opportunity. Again, refer back to that planning P that you gave everybody at the beginning of the last section. So here we talk about, what's the purpose of the incident objectives, and you're really focusing down here on phase two, which is the establishment of incident objectives. And this is where, again, there's a lot of details within your facilitator's guide about how to frame this conversation and examples to use. The example that I found has been most useful when talking about priorities and objectives has been, your priority being mass care and your objective being to shelter impacted population, or to feed breakfast, lunch, and dinner to shelter residents and first responders, something along those lines. And again, an objective is an actionable statement that is then used by individuals on an operation. So you're working through this section, you're discussing it. and then you're working through priorities, objectives, strategies, and tactics, and work assignments. And again, at this point, again, which is also mentioned in your facilitator's guide, use this as an opportunity to bring home the point that will be made in section 1 as we talk about the table of organization, that the command and general staff, and again, help you remind them what the command and general staff is, that it's your command staff is your director, external relations AD, and your deputy director, and then your general staff is your flop line, your finance, logistics, operations, and planning ADs. And so it's those individuals that have a responsibility for excuse me. They have a responsibility for the establishment of those incident objectives and priorities. So moving down onto sort of phase 2 outcomes, this is phase 2 of the planning side. Again, you're working through the understanding of senior leadership, working through some of these bullets, and you're discussing those with the class. And again, I would highlight, we jump down here to incident priorities, but the way that I've written it in the facilitator's guide is really have that conversation about priorities and objectives at this section. You'll see this on the facilitator's guide. I really have a lot of your conversation about priorities and objectives in this section, and then use these slides down here to then go back to the point and further reinforce those agenda topics. Again, and also important, in the facilitator's guide, don't follow it word to word. It's meant to be a guide. Put it in your own words, however you need to do it. If you need to mix some things up, I'm more concerned about, I want people to get the right information than I am about individual formats. So, use your own, develop your own style and flair as an instructor, and don't feel that you're stuck to those individual words. I just want the concepts to be consistent as they're being taught out within your local areas. Some more discussions about good incident objectives, and then incident objectives characteristics. And then we're going to move into the priorities and objectives exercise. And so at this point, what I ask you before you get people into your exercise, and again, I have instructions in the facilitator's guide about how to do this, but this is where you're going to need to divide your group into 4 or 5 participants. Now, you could either do it right before the exercise, or you could do it at the beginning of the IAP section, but either way, before the exercise, they need to be divided into groups of either 4 or 5. And within those groups, they then need to assume certain positions on a table of organization. I have outlined those positions within the facilitator's guide for what those positions should be. And then everyone's playing their role. You're ensuring that everyone has a specific role. And then you're going to hand out the some information regarding the priorities and objectives exercise. That's where you're going to get out your flooding scenario and some basic information. And then together as a group, they have a responsibility for completing and developing incident priorities and objectives for the next operational period. And again, every time you say some of these things, use it as an example to further reinforce, well, what's an operational period? So you're focusing on tomorrow in this instance. So we're not planning for today. We're planning for tomorrow when we're developing what our priorities and objectives are going to be for tomorrow. Give them 10 minutes to do this, and then also provide them instruction that the AD for planning has to document those priorities and objectives, and then be prepared to present those out within the group. So then you move on. After the session, you had 10 minutes, you discussed a little bit. Then you move into the Command and General Staff meeting. We talk a little bit about who has to be who comes to the Command and General Staff meeting, what are the meeting outcomes, and then the meeting agenda. And again, this is where you're discussing at the Command and General Staff meeting is the Command and General Staff are finalizing and agreeing upon the priorities and objectives for the next operational period. Again, this is one of the first meetings of the day, and then this information is then pushed out to the rest of the operation to help plan around it. So before I move on to conducting the operations tactics meeting, any questions so far from anybody on the phone? Okay, let me check in the chat feature to see if we have any questions there. Hey, Matt, I got your question in the chat feature, and I just want to ask, what do you mean? I'm trying to understand what planning are you talking about? The Texas planning P, or what are you referring to?
Hey, Neil. I was referring to the one I handed to you that outlined where the different forms fit in the planning P process.
Ah, yes. So at this point, I would say just use the picture of the planning P. The only reason is because there are some forms that we're not going to be using, and we haven't really finalized within the national organization what the final template for a Red Cross IAP is going to look like. So I just don't want to confuse anybody. So I'd say until we get that defined, I'd say just stick with the picture.
Okay. I was going to do kind of a merger of the two just as a sample. Would you still advocate doing that, or do we want to just wait until the final IAP version is settled?
I'd say let's just wait until the final IAP, only because I would hate to have someone out there that says something that might not be as correct as we further define the direction that we're going. So I would just hold off on that and just give them the color P.
Very well.
Okay. Okay, so now moving into the preparing for and conducting the operations tactics meeting. And during this section, this is where I think where you really have to keep things really tightened up with how you discuss the 215 process and the reason for the 215s and why we as an organization are going down it. The first thing is as we go through this, and I'm talking about this a little bit out of order just to sort of give this as an example. We really need to highlight in this section that the organization, that the intention is a very clear direction of having operations being driven at the local level, and the 215 process is the document that allows us to be driven at the local level. So what I would really encourage you guys to do is stay at a medium level, so stay at a 10,000 foot level. Don't go so far down in the weeds because you're just going to confuse people with processes and how every little thing's going to fit on the 215, and really that's not the point of this class. The point is that you'll have a general understanding of the direction we're going, and so they have to understand the goal of this section is they have a general understanding of what a 215 is, what it's supposed to do, and how the folks within the local area are actually driving operations. So that's really what you need to focus on. So don't get hung up on answering questions about, well, who signs off on it at this level and who goes to this level, because again, some of that stuff has not been defined yet. So just keep it at a mid-level with focusing on making sure you'll have a general understanding of the direction we're going, and they understand the reason behind doing the 215 is going to allow our folks in the local level and the districts to be able to drive the operations as opposed to operations being driven from a senior leadership at a DRO headquarters. So first thing is, and I got to reformat this slide a little bit, we're talking about preparing for the operations tactics meetings. This is, again, where you're talking about what the AD for operations is going to do. And again, this is a good opportunity. Anytime you have an opportunity to further reinforce that the command and general staff is just focusing on forward planning and high-level strategy, take that opportunity. Again, if there's any real big cultural shift within the organization, it's that our DRO senior leadership are not going to be focused and cannot be focused in tactical work. So anytime that you see an opportunity to make that plug again, make it, because it's something that we really want people to really stick in, because it's something that we're going to continue to have to re-educate and work through on every operation in the near future. Then we go down to the operational planning. Again, further conversations on priorities and objectives we talked about, and now moving into strategies and tactics. And the strategies and tactics are going to be developed. This is, again, where you've defined who's doing your forward planning and your high-level strategy, but your tactical work and your more local-level strategy, that is going to be created by your subject matter experts at your local level. So on an operation with districts, it'll be at your district level, and an operation without districts, it'll be at your mass care, your client casework, health and mental health, those types of things. That's where you're going to be creating the strategies and tactics. Then some conversations regarding what strategies and tactics are, and then how you determine strategies, and then developing tactics, how you do that. And then developing a tactical plan, and this is, again, you're walking through this, And this is where, after you're walking through this, this is where you're going to introduce, in the next couple slides here, the actual 215. And this is where you're taking all of these steps in this process here on the development of a tactical plan, and it's going to be documented on a 215. And that's really what I want the message to be, is that it is a planning worksheet. It is a tool. It is not just another paperwork you got to send in. So get people out of that mindset and use it as a tool that puts them in control. And it's through this tool that they put down their tactical plan and they communicate that tactical plan back up the chain. So those are the important aspects. That it's a tool for them, and it is the mechanism in which we ensure that the operations and strategies and tactics are being driven at the local level. Without the form, the whole process won't work. The other thing that's important is the ICS Form 215 is not a Red Cross developed form. We're taking a tried and true methodology from government responses and other emergency response, and we're tailoring it to the Red Cross. So this process does work, and it's worked on numerous operations across the country. So trust in the process, and all we have to do is tailor it to Red Cross and educate our people on it. And then more information on the signing resources, and we'll talk about that just in a moment. And then this is where you go into the operational planning worksheet, the ICS Form 215, and then the ICS, and here's an example of the ICS Form 215. This is also an example of a time where you're going to hand out, the actual physical copy of the ICS Form 215, as well as the one with some spaces already filled in. So that is an important aspect of the thing, is to hand those worksheets out. Have people have a chance to ask questions, to seek feedback on it. And then at this point, this is where you're also going to briefly mention the Red Cross 204. And you can back up a little bit to go into the assigning resources and talk about the 204s, and that's part of the IAP. And stress that the 204s are created just by the planning section. So nobody else is going to create them, but everybody else is going to be a user of that information. And you'll talk about the IAP and the components and the 204s coming up here in just a moment. But that's just an opportunity to engage them in that and just to introduce it. So then you move into your strategy and tactics exercise. And so on your strategy and tactics exercise, again, there's more information and more instructions in your facilitator's guide about what that looks like. But at this point in the strategy and tactics exercise, what you'll be doing is you'll be providing, the next component of the scenario. Everyone's still working within their same groups and in their same positions. And then you just basically give them the instruction on how to complete it, give them 15, 20 minutes, and have them document their strategies and tactics. So any questions regarding that process or that segment of the course? And again, there's more information that's further defined within the facilitator's guidebook. Okay, let me check the chat feature really quick. Okay. So next is preparing for and conducting the planning meeting. This is where, again, we're going to talk about what the planning meeting outcome is, what the process is, and then talk about the planning meeting agenda and remind them who conducts the planning meeting, who facilitates it, go through all of these components. And then the IAP components and organization. Again, the planning meeting is for putting it all together and presenting your IAP to your group for review and approval. And so at this point, this is where you should hand out, if you haven't already done so, hand out examples of a completed IAP. And I can, provide you with examples of IAPs, or if you have one from a past operation, in the last month or two, you can use that example. Make sure that, it's a good IAP and there wasn't some errors on it, because, we just don't want people to training people in incorrect fashion. So, walk through each of the components of a Red Cross IAP, and again, reminding them that the template is still a temporary template. And so we have not gotten the full one out. So don't tell them not to get, attached to any one form, because that may be changing. But again, walk through it, and again, remind them who has a responsibility for completing those certain things. And then this is a good opportunity now, again, to remind them on what a 204 is and a work assignment, and who has to complete that, which is going to be your AD, which is your planning group. And then down into the IAP review and approval process. And then logistics management, things like that, some basic stuff. And then preparing for and conducting the operations briefing. So this is, again, where your good opportunity to highlight here is to talk about previous disaster relief operations long morning meetings. Again, those meetings have lasted very long in the past. This briefing is designed to replace those morning meetings and provides an operational briefing at the end of the day for everyone on operation. It can be done in person. It can be done via phone call or a combination of both. And so this is what the purpose of the operation briefing is, to review that. And then talk about the outcomes a little bit, and then sort of go over the agenda. And the AD for operations has a responsibility for conducting the operations briefing. And then after the operations briefing, this is ensuring the information is further disseminated down through the ranks of the operation. And then we move into the IAP execution and assessment. I've got another slide here that has a formatting issue, so I'll have to go back and reformat that. This is, again, where you're executing that IAP and assessment. So this is done at the end of the day, first thing in the morning, and you're basically reviewing the previous IAP, comparing it to your 5266, to your sit rep, and discussing whether or not you were able to meet your goals and objectives. So really, you're checking to see if you are on track with the operation. So again, the IAP is not to be a fantasy document, a goal. It should be what you said you're going to do. So what you're doing at the end of the day is you're looking over your 5266 and your sit rep and saying, did we accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish? And then adjust your plans accordingly based off of whatever that answer is. And so at the end of this, and again, I've got an old slide deck here. I need to send you guys a new one, which has taken some of these other slides out. This is basically the end of the first day. So you'll have some opportunities to ask questions, to engage feedback. And then the next morning, and again, this is all lined out within your facilitator's guide, is just the IAP exercise. So you'll sit everybody down in their groups again, but this time you'll rearrange the positions. So I gave you some instructions, a guideline. Rearrange the positions however you guys want. It's your class. But I gave you some guidelines for what I found to be useful within the facilitator's guide. And then basically what they have is their task. They're going to get a new exercise scenario or a continuation of the exercise scenario, and they're at the beginning of the day. And so their goal is to really develop an IAP for the next operational period, meaning they have to develop the IAP for tomorrow, and they've got to go through the entire process and work it out. And they'll have about 2 hours to do that using the new information on their scenario. And then they'll have to come back as a group and discuss and work through it and have sort of a facilitated discussion led by the instructor. So they give about 2 hours to really work through it, to develop it, and be available during that time to answer any questions or to provide guidance as needed. And that's really the IAP section. About 5 to 6 hours is really going through those components, the exercises, and things of that nature. So again, the facilitator's guide is there to be a reference for you. I put a lot more information in that facilitator's guide. There probably needs to be some more. So do not hesitate to ask for additional clarification or ask for additional resources to be included in the facilitator's guide. So send that to me as soon as possible, and we will get that back out to you guys. So at this point, you guys are the ones who are going to be teaching this course. So do you have any questions, any need for additional information as it stands right now, or any questions about facilitation of the course? Okay, let me check the chat feature. Got no questions on the chat feature. And I did get a question about how I explain DRMT integration. And the DRMT component is actually in section 1 of the first section, which we had to cancel that one yesterday due to some WebEx issues, so we weren't able to make that. But that is explained in section 1. And Eric, do you need any other questions regarding the DRMT? Eric Jones? Okay. Oh, that's all right. Hey, Eric.
So what I have experienced, at least in some of the instruction, has been really, I think, is some of the paradigm shifts we'll have to get to as an organization. And that is, if you have someone who's typed higher or is higher qualified than you are in the incident command world, it's socially acceptable to take over, quote unquote. And I think that it would be or could be a perception if a division response management team appeared that they would be basically assuming command at a higher level is the reality, but the perception from those on the ground might be that we would be taking over. And I think that could happen at all levels of whoever would be being relieved in this new structure. So I think it's a social paradigm shift within the volunteer culture from bottom up and even top down to not be taken over as assuming command who has higher levels of experience than you might. I've heard some healthy debate on that, but perhaps that's part of the 20%.
Well, I think it's actually, I think we covered that in the ConOps section. We talked about the DRMT, and one of the, I think, the beneficial things that people need to understand is that, you know, the intention is where possible, and when we have qualified and capable people at the local level, that they will be able to assume control over that operation. So, I mean, and again, I'm speaking right now, and I just want to say very clearly that I'm speaking just for Texas because I don't want to speak outside of those boundaries. But so if we have a disaster in Texas and we have somebody in one of their local communities that is capable and available of running that operation, I'm less concerned with what their official rank is within the system. But if we have somebody who, you know, we don't, like right now, example, we don't have anybody who's ranked as an AD for planning, but we've had people assume that role in an operation because they're capable and available to do so. So I think, you know, we as an organization have to take a really clear look for how we're going to engage leadership and utilize leadership on operations, because it's not a fiscally, you know, appropriate thing to continue to send in teams when we have people capable of running that operation at the local levels. But you're always going to have that issue, whether there may be, you know, if it's someone, you're having to send somebody in from a region to a territory to help support an operation, or from a division or from national, there's always going to be that assumption regarding someone that's coming to take over. And that's where we have to go and re-educate our leaders to say that your goal is not to take over because operations are being driven at the local level. And so that is the very clear intention of this, regardless of how some of this other stuff shakes out, is that operations are driven at the local level. And the way that we do that on operations is by following this process. And in Blue Sky roles is by building capacity within our leadership ranks at the local level so that when the disaster hits, there are people who are available and capable of assuming command in their local area. So any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys very much for taking the time out. Now you guys get a little out a little early. We will have our second session, our third session on the service delivery planning tomorrow. And then I'm going to reschedule for probably early next week the ConOps section, where we'll be able to review through that. So thank you all very much. And again, if you want to call me, send me an email afterwards. If you have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to do so. I am here to support you in this effort, so don't feel like you're bothering. Send any question that you have. I want to make sure that you feel comfortable before you know, as you're conducting these trainings. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day.